Thanks for tuning in. I'm Andy Zopp, and this is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. At the roundtable this week, Brandon Pope, Juatise Gathings, and Francia Garcia Hernandez joined me to discuss the latest departures from the mayor's administration, a possible new job for recently fired CPS CEO Pedro Martinez, and the conviction last week of former Speaker of the House Michael Madigan on federal corruption charges. I'll also sit one-on-one with the Inspector General for the City of Chicago, Deborah Witzburg, to talk about her office's efforts to protect the public trust, including concern over Mayor Johnson's and Lightfoot's interference in investigations. We'll get started on the other side of a short break. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Robin Robinson, inviting you to tune in to the new CAN TV original program, In Other News. Each week, I will break down newsworthy topics that traditional outlets may ignore, grounded in truth, fun, and blackness, from the trap house to the White House, with the big house in between. Join the conversation on CAN TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app. Hyper-local news and critical analysis. Experience the power of community television.
Fraud, self-dealing for personal gain, and falsified reports are among the findings from the Chicago Office of Inspector General's fourth quarter report for 2024. Joining me today to discuss these findings and others highlighted in the report, as well as other key concerns related to the protection of the public trust, is the Inspector General for the City of Chicago, Deborah Witzburg. Deborah, thank you so much for coming back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Always great to have you, although a little disconcerting. So let's talk about the fourth quarter report. You had 10 sustained administrative findings this time. Let's talk a little bit about kind of what they covered and what that means for for government and for the public.
In our quarterly reports, as you know, that's the only place where we are able to report out on our administrative investigations, where we find that city actors have broken the rules. Those investigations are confidential, but our quarterly reports are the places where we can tell those stories. And the stories that we told in this quarter, in the report for the fourth quarter of the year, really catalog serious misconduct across different departments in city government. So we reported on a couple of different PPP loan fraud investigations where we found that city employees defrauded the government. We reported on an investigation into fire department members who, among them, falsified reports and committed other acts of misconduct to provide what they called a professional courtesy for a high-ranking fire department official who was found slumped over the wheel of a car. Ooh. We detailed findings of an Office of the City Clerk employee who took more than $6,000 in cash literally out of the cash register drawer for their own benefit. It's city money. That money belongs to the taxpayers. So in those, among others, we highlighted these really serious acts of misconduct, which we've been able to ferret out in our investigative work.
And just a couple of things. So when you make those findings, I would assume you turn them back over to the agencies, and then they're the ones who are accountable for taking action. How does the public know that those findings are acted upon?
That's a great question. That's right. So we make investigative findings and disciplinary recommendations, and then it is up to the city departments to implement them or not. That information is included in our quarterly report summaries.
Okay.
So by the time we report out on a case, we will have made that recommendation to the departments and gotten a response, and all of that information is included.
So it's in the reports.
Yes.
Well, that's great. Well, hopefully in some of those instances that you talked about, that they're acted on. I want to circle back to the PPP question because, of course, that's all related to COVID, and we're still uncovering fraud. Overall, I mean, those aren't obviously not the first ones. Overall, how much PPP fraud have you looked at in your time?
A lot, which is why we're still at it. Right. So, instead of waiting for tips to come in about city employees with bad loans, we did a proactive data analysis. We identified more than 1,000 PPP loans issued to people under our jurisdiction. So this proactive data analysis yielded a huge pool of leads. Not all of those loans were fraudulent by any means, but many of them are. And so this is a large-scale effort, and we're still at it.
You received 11,000 reports overall in 2024, a 30% increase. Is that a reflection of increasing bad behavior, or more people being open efforts to know that people can and should report fraud?
I think it's the latter. I sincerely think that that's a good news story. So as you say, our intakes, the number of times we hear from people about things that are going wrong or suggestions they have, is going up, and it has gone up dramatically over recent quarters. I think that that is good news. I think that we are getting more intakes and more complaints, not because more things are going wrong in city government. I think we are hearing from people more often because more people know who we are and what we do and where to find us. And maybe most importantly, more people are willing to believe that if they have a problem, there's an agency in city government that can help.
Right. And I do think it's important for us to note here that there are, that these are a fraction of the employees that work for city government. The overwhelming, by far, majority of city and government employees come every day to work, to do their job, to do it well, and to try and be honest. And often, sometimes the intakes are from coworkers who who are disappointed that they're working with people who aren't following the same kind of guide rules. So I think that's important.
Absolutely right.
So another area is that you did send a memo to the City Council, Chairman of Ethics and Government Oversight, and expressing concerns about both Mayor Johnson and Mayor Lightfoot and how they had responded to some of the investigations you were doing. You want to talk a little bit about what your letter said and what you're concerned about?
Yes. So this memo of sorts that we sent to the City Council was in response to some questions that arose both in public comment and from committee members at the City Council Committee on Ethics and Government Oversight hearing last month. And we identified in response to those questions long-standing practices of the city and of the city's law department specifically, which meaningfully obstruct and delay OIG investigations. And I think that those practices present threats to our independence and our effectiveness.
Oh, and what kind of practices are we talking about?
It's really three things at issue. One has to do with the law department preventing OIG from seeing certain city records. So the law says that we have access to city records and information, but the law department regularly asserts attorney-client privilege over those records. That is complicated and I believe not well-founded in the law for a variety of reasons, including that we are part of the city. We are the client. This is an issue that has been sort of fought and won on the federal level with federal IGs and access to agency records. So I think on that issue, Chicago is at this point really far out of line with national standards and the federal law.
And are they worried about, if they show you the records that they would somehow be waiving privilege? And your response to that, I think, is that we are the client, so you're not waiving privilege?
Yeah, I don't know what their concern is. My fear is that privilege is being used as a synonym for embarrassing. The law, I think, is very clear on the waiver question and others, and so we sort of lay all that out in the letter to City Council. All of these things, all of these obstructions that we identify, I think are being used or are at a minimum vulnerable to being used in a way that shields from accountability and investigation certain people and certain programs and certain issues if they threaten embarrassment to City Hall. We can't do it that way. So the other issues have to do with a demand from the mayor's lawyers to sit in on OIG investigative interviews. We can't have that. We can't ask whistleblowers and complainants to get stared down by the mayor's lawyers across the table. And then finally, the third issue has to do with subpoena enforcement. So OIG has authority to issue administrative subpoenas, and the law department has read the current language of the law to say that they get to pick and choose which of those subpoenas we can enforce based on whom we are investigating. That can't be how this works. And so we've identified these issues and we've made suggestions for amendments to the law to provide for stronger, more independent oversight.
Speaking of fraudulent and corrupt and corruption in the government, we've heard a lot of noise out of New York this recently in this past week, and saw 4 senior members of Mayor Adams saw criminal charges. First, the mayor was indicted, criminal charges dropped. Then we saw A number of prosecutors resigned before they would drop those charges, and then a number of people from the mayor's team resigned. And I thought there was so much happening that maybe that people didn't really understand what was occurring there. And I knew you and I, both having experience in the space, might be able to have a little bit of a conversation. So, I mean, your take on what was driving the senior members of the Mayor Adams team in leaving?
Well, I don't want to speculate too much about their individual thinking.
No, but, I mean, at a high level.
Yeah, I will say I think what we're seeing play out in New York in city government there is that there's an illegitimacy tipping point. There's a point at which public trust is so compromised that government cannot continue to function. I think that's what we're seeing. I think we are likely seeing longstanding, hardworking public officials finding that past that illegitimacy tipping point, government can't function. It doesn't have the will of the governed.
Right. And I think what makes this different from a lot of other situations is I saw an analyst really kind of frame it very well, which is that prosecutors drop cases all the time. And typically it's because for a reason, the reason being that they can't prove it. Right. Their evidence changes, they lose a witness, and those decisions often are not questioned because they happen, and that's what prosecutors are supposed to do. In this particular case, the prosecutors were directed to dismiss the case for purely political reasons, which is the Trump administration wanted Mayor Adams to help them, particularly in immigration, which means that it became very close to what you and I refer to as a quid pro quo, which is you help us, we'll drop these charges, and that makes it very untenable for people to work in that environment when they're trying to be working with integrity. And
I think that's right, and I think that makes this so connected to the issues we've talked about, where we see challenges to our effectiveness. Political considerations have no place in misconduct investigations.
Right. And when you're doing the investigation, it doesn't matter what their politics are, their personality, or what they're doing. It's the conduct that you're trying to look at.
That's right.
So thank you for being here. And again, I really appreciate it. It's nice to see you.
Thank you.
On the other side of this break, I'll be joined by our roundtable regulars to unpack news coming out of City Hall and a new job for the recently sacked CPS CEO. Stay with us.
Every community has a story, a pulse, a voice waiting to be heard. At CAN TV, we bring these stories to life, from the heart of Chicago to your living room. Join us in supporting hyper-local television. Your backing helps us cover what matters directly in our communities, unfiltered and upfront. Help tell the important stories of our communities. Become a program underwriter today.
Last week, several key officials announced their departures from Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's administration, including Jamie Rhee, Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Aviation, and Jose Tirado, Executive Director of the Office of Emergency Management and Communications, OEMC. Additionally, Joe Covello, the mayor's chief strategy officer, stepped down this week less than a year after being hired to shore up the administration's then struggling communications effort. These announcements came only days after the mayor publicly expressed a desire to expedite changes within his administration, stating he regretted not having cleaned house faster. Joining me to take a closer look at the departures and what they mean for a less than popular administration are roundtable regulars, Block Club Chicago reporter Francia Garcia Hernandez and co-founder of the Just Act Partners, Juatise Gathings, and making his first newsroom appearance, Emmy Award-winning journalist and host, Brandon Pope. Welcome back, Francia and Juatise. Welcome, Brandon.
Glad to be here, thanks.
Let's get started. So, more people leaving. What do we think? Is this a big deal, or is this part of what he's doing, cleaning house? What do you think, Francia?
Well, in all of the statements of the three people who left, they never mentioned they were forced to resign or they were fired. But, the timing still is questionable. Nevertheless, these are significant positions in city administration. This is aviation, which oversees two of the airports that we have in the city that bring in a lot of flights, but also revenue for the city, and are the hub of United, which is an important source of revenue and business for the city, as well as employment And it really gives the city kind of like a strong place in business. So these are important positions. OEMC in a city that needs so many emergency resources, it is important as well. And of course, COPA, which oversees our police department, which has, many issues to oversee and many policy changes that should be happening. So these are significant vacancies.
Yeah. So Brandon, what do you think? I mean, Jamie Reed's been with the city for a long time. She's very experienced. Issues at the airport impact a broader area, and
more than just Chicagoans.
Right. And departures are part of the issue, but the question is then, are the replacements? So it doesn't feel like he has replacements in the wings.
Mm-hmm. And that aviation one especially, it comes at a really wild time for that department itself. You think about the improvements and revamp of O'Hare Airport. You think about Midway projects. You think about the pitches to try to get more businesses commercialized inside these airports. And then the business interests of, United Airlines. They've been flirting with potentially moving out of Chicago. When they see a move like that instability, does that give them any more kind of comfort to want to stay in Chicago? Lots of questions raised around that. And still, you have to add here, there's still positions that are unfilled by this administration as well, with CHA and now the Chicago Public Transportation Administration. So lots of questions there. It doesn't look good, but once again, we're not sure if they're connected to his comments. Really, the only people that know that are the mayor and those people that decided to resign and retire.
Right. Look, my view is, every mayor has the right to pick their people. I think the challenge that I see is kind of, first of all, these are critical roles. And when the airport, OEMC, his communications person, and it doesn't feel like there's a plan. That's what makes me nervous. I don't know. What do you think, Juatise, in terms of replacing them with equivalent level experience and talent?
I think one of the characteristics of an effective leader is surrounding themselves with people to help them effectively govern. And as we talked about, these are not roles where you can train up or develop persons. These are very specialized roles that need expertise. And to have these vacancies without strong succession planning, as Brandon mentioned, the administration has a history of not being able to fill vacancies. I think it's something to be concerned about, especially considering the variety of the roles. He still has vacancies that were previously unfilled. But I do think that we should be concerned, not just because of the fact that folks are leaving, but the nature of the roles in which they're vacating is going to be a challenge for the city.
Yeah, I think part of it reflects some growing pains as well.
Sure.
For Brandon Johnson, who he would admit, he's new to this. It's a new thing. And as he was being candid there, he believes he probably should have made changes sooner. It appears that way, right? If you know you wanted to make changes in these key industries, you probably should have had that mandate to start. You're going on almost 2 years in office at this point. It feels kind of like, why now? And so I'm very curious to see who is put in to these positions to replace, because like we all said numerous times, it's critical. We're talking about livelihoods at this point, especially as we see headlines with the aviation, planes coming out of the sky all of a sudden. Please, we need somebody who knows what they're doing.
We have to have a succession plan.
Yeah.
Well, and also, and you touched on this, the airport is in the middle of a massive bid process for all of the stores and restaurants, or not stores, restaurants in the terminals, in Terminal 2. And so you're like, wow, and that's a huge big deal, like very political, it's a huge problem. So to have leadership leave in the middle of that. Overall though, Francia, how do you think this impacts the mayor in trying to move his policy agenda and try and move forward on the objectives he wants to accomplish?
Well, I think one of the things that the mayor has shown is a little bit of a struggle is to see how leaders in each department, qualified leaders, can move forward policies, can bring stakeholders together, even if they're on the other side of the table, and then negotiate and get to a point where everybody can move forward for the city. This can't be a one-sided proposal or deal in any of his policy items. So I think not having those leaders appointed, ready to talk with the industry connections, with the experience, really puts him at a position where it's harder to negotiate. You're starting kind of like from scratch, to say it, casually. These are important vacancies. So it's not like somebody who has an idea of these industries but has no experience can go in and make these things happen.
Yeah, and she makes a very good point. I mean, when you think about some of these key leaders, they've served across several administrations. And so when you think about their ability to bring folks together, no matter who the leader is, that's a skill that not everybody has. And so not only are you looking for the expertise, you're looking for somebody to almost be bipartisan in this political climate to actually get the deals done. And I do think that can impact the things that he wanted to get done for his agenda.
But this is also a city hall administration that they've had their thoughts on experience questioned. You know, they don't seem like they actually value having people from past administrations come in, kind of seeing them as the wrong way to have leadership. And so things like this only reinforce that point, whether it's a fair narrative or not. It doesn't help assuage it at all.
Right, and I think the challenge is, look, again, I think that perspective of I want innovation, I want somebody who isn't set in the ways of the past, who's done things all the way they've done before. There's nothing wrong with that perspective, Certainly. Right? It's a completely legitimate perspective. I think the challenge is, fine, but that person kind of needs to know what they're doing, right? Maybe they don't know this airport, but maybe they know another airport, or they've had experience, or maybe they don't know our OAMC. And to not have those people, by the way, I think we all know, are hard to find.
Certainly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so to not have them in the wings, I think, is I think what the concern is. Absolutely not the right to do it, or their right to make choices to go do whatever else they want to do. It's the lack of, every business, and Juatise knows this, having a corporate background as well, does succession planning.
That's
right? And so, I don't think that this is, how do we think, Francia, I want to ask you this question, start with you. Well, how do you think this is going to impact, his polling? The mayor's polling is not great. Favorability rating is 14% in the latest Illinois Policy Institute polls, the lowest ever in Chicago mayoral history. And 80% of the 800 voters they talked to, 80% have an unfavorable view, and nearly over 65% said it was very unfavorable. How is this kind of decision making or lack thereof have an impact on that?
Well, without having a crystal ball, I would think most voters will be disappointed again because of what these moves signal, and because we don't have a succession plan, because we don't have a valid, or I don't want to say valid, but like an explanation as to why these key positions are being emptied now and why they will stay vacant for however long they stay vacant. So I don't think this will be favorable for the mayor, especially at a time when federally there are threats of cuts of positions, of funding, of projects, and at the state level, we're seeing that as well. So it's a time when it's really critical to have leaders that can get the job done, and not having that can really hurt the mayor's administration.
I would add, Illinois Policy Institute, with respect to my friends over there, there's reason to question the source of that polling. They're not the biggest Brandon Johnson fans.
Fair.
But there is no doubt.
Skewed, so maybe it's not quite that bad. I get you.
I don't know the methodology of their poll necessarily.
Totally legitimate point. Fair.
I will add, though, that there's no doubt that this mayor has some unfavorability in the city. Now, do I think that this story here with these resignations and retirements is going to break through and something that voters are going to look at a year from now and say, yeah, I remember when this happened? I don't think that necessarily. I think what's more likely to impact those numbers and has impacted those numbers is the CPS situation with the Chicago Teachers Union, right? And situations like that, that's where I think you see the unfavorability numbers come in. This type of staff layover, it gets us talking. I'm not sure it gets everyday Chicagoans riled up.
I think you're totally right, and we're going to move to CPS. I think the challenge is what happens is the deficit flow through.
Yeah.
When stuff doesn't happen, when already we have, particularly in communities of color, we have people complaining about response time. When they call 911, right? That's been a huge issue. We have, as I said, the bids coming, getting the terminals done, all that that goes south, right? So I think it's as I said earlier, not the change itself, but the how you manage the change is really what.
And
so
the
we'll see.
impacts,
There was in the paper this week that speaking of the CPS, that CEO Pedro Martinez is up for a job in Las Vegas. So do we think it's time for him to move on and let us focus on CPS? I don't know, Juatise, what do you think?
This is a tough one for me. I think that, Pedro is in a very tough position, and kudos to him for trying to rebuild his life and trying to find pathways for himself and his family. But the reality of it is we have a lot going on. And right now, having a new superintendent when we are, facing federal challenges with the Department of Education, is not going to fare well for our kids. And at the end of the day, children on the South and West Side are going to suffer as a result of playing politics with our education system. And I think that is something that we should all be concerned about. I'm surprised that more parents and more organizations aren't in an uproar about it, but I do think that we are in for a long haul. And I'm mostly concerned about some of our marginalized students who, are on the South and West Sides, but also those who have special education needs and other things, that their services will not be met absent of leadership to rearrange things as we try to combat what's going to happen from the federal government.
So another issue around change and how you manage change, not whether or not you have the right to execute change and have the people you want to run things, but how you do it, I think, is really the question that I think we're raising. And unfortunately, I really wanted to talk about Mike Madigan getting convicted, but we have run out of time as usual. But so we'll have to save that corruption conviction for another day. Thank you so much, Francia, Juatise, Brandon. Welcome, and thank you all for being here. On the other side of this break, I'm back with some final thoughts. Stay with us.
CAN TV is the lens through which Chicago's stories are told, harnessing the unifying power of community television. With CAN TV On Demand, immerse yourself in the richness of our city through exclusive stories and programs tailored just for you, connecting you to the heartbeats of our streets, the voices of our people, and the spirit that makes Chicago unique. Discover the strength of your community on CAN TV On Demand.
As one more election cycle settles into the rear view, one thing remains clear. Black women once again showed up. We organized, mobilized, educated, and voted, pouring our energy into a system that too often fails to honor our labor. And yet the results may not have reflected the hopes we carried to the ballot box. That reality is frustrating, disappointing, and even exhausting. But in this moment, we need to remember one thing. We have the right to rest. Rest is not retreat. Rest is not surrender. Rest is resistance. For generations, Black women have carried the weight of this nation on our backs, fighting for justice, pushing for change, and showing up even when the systems we uphold refuse to show up for us. But we cannot continue to pour from an empty cup. We cannot afford to let exhaustion become our norm. And we do not owe this country our constant labor while it figures out how to value us in return. So take the time you need. Breathe. Step back if you must. Prioritize your peace. The work of liberation is long, and it requires us to be well. Self-care is not selfish. It is survival. Whether it means unplugging from the news cycle, leaning into community, or simply finding moments of joy amid uncertainty, do what you must to preserve yourself. Yes, there is work ahead. Yes, we will continue to hold power accountable, to protect our communities, and to demand the dignity and respect we deserve. But rest is a revolutionary act. It is a declaration that we are not machines built for struggle alone. We are human, deserving of love, joy, and restoration. America must now deal with the consequences of its choices. That burden is not ours to carry alone. So to every Black woman who has given her all in this election season, you have done enough. You are enough, and you deserve to rest. Thank you for tuning in, Chicago. That's our time for this week. We're back next week with an all-new edition of Chicago Newsroom 2.0. Until then, be well and well-informed.